Okay, welcome to session 8 of WP's Do Summit Good. Really excited about this session. I'm really pleased and very happy to introduce you to Jill Binder joining us today. Jill, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for inviting me to this inaugural event today.
You're very, very welcome. And Babs, thank you for joining me on this session. We are going to be talking about diversity. So Jill is going to be, or Jill is representing the WordPress Diverse Speaker Training Group. So I'm going to be spending a few minutes initially just talking about that and talking about what that actually is, what's involved within it, and really just shining a light on a really incredibly important topic. It's a topic that's come up a few times throughout the day, which I'm really, really pleased about. But just before we get started, again, as usual, a couple of bits of housekeeping. If you have any questions at all that come up throughout the session, please do drop them in the chat, which I think is over this side on the website. The questions, we'll make sure that we collect them for after through the live Q&A. Below us, as we've mentioned a few times, there's an orange button and it says donate. If you have the ability, if you have the opportunity to donate, then we would be incredibly grateful. All donations that are collected throughout this event today are going to be distributed across the various non-profit organizations that are being represented within this event. So you are supporting not one, but many non-profit organizations by making that donation. So if you can, thank you. If you are unable to, but you are able to share the URL, wp&up.org/live, that would be fantastic as well. Okay, I now have the pleasure of introducing you to Jill. And Jill, please introduce us to the WordPress Diverse Speaker Training Group.
Great, thank you very much. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who has been here all day or who have just joined us. Good afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. It is just afternoon for me in Vancouver. And also, I like to be completely transparent. I've never introduced my work before without my story. And I saw that we had the 10-minute intro and then our talk. And so I'm going to try out a thing for the first time. I might stumble over it, explaining without the story what the group is about. And then I'll get into my talk telling my story about it. So the Diverse Speaker Training Workshop. Here I go, attempting an explanation about it without the story. So this is a group in the community, we're in the Make WordPress community team, and starts with a question. Have you ever had trouble getting women and other underrepresented folks to speak at your events? We did too. And did you know that there's a solution to this? There's no one perfect solution, but there is a speaker training workshop written by and for female members of the WordPress community. It busts through the typical objections like, what would I talk about? And I don't know enough about anything to give a talk on it. And this training runs through exercises and public speaking practice opportunities for finding a topic, crafting good pitches, bios, and outlines, and covers tips to becoming a better speaker. And this workshop has been tested and proven to increase the diversity of speakers at meetups and WordCamps. Groups typically go from about 10% diverse speakers at the WordCamps to, in just a few months, 50%. And that happens in just a few months. In 2017, Seattle had 60% women speakers, and in 2018, Vancouver had 63%. In late 2017, under Andrea Middleton's guidance, I created and I now lead a group of passionate folk to run and promote this fantastic workshop all over the world. And we are a working group that is part of the Make WordPress community team. And FYI, by the way, we're always open to more volunteers. Our workshop is either 1 or 4 hour hands-on lesson plan written out for you. And the full plan, what we cover is we bust through imposter syndrome, help folks find a topic, help the future speakers create their title, pitch, bio, and outline, discuss better speaker tips, give the participants a chance to practice speaking, and help build confidence. And I wanted to show you the page where people sign up to run this workshop. We are in the middle of working on improving our process so that more people come to the trainings, and after the trainings, more people actually run the workshop. And so we now have a few steps written out that I am going to bring up on my screen. If I scroll down, yes, it scrolls down on the screen. So we have a few steps for groups to go through now. We have first a what is this workshop video. It's a 2-minute version of the talk I'm going to give you after this. And it explains how this helps with diversity, because we don't, as I'll explain in my talk after, it's not an in-your-face talking about diverse topics. It is more addressing the things in the background. And I talk about this here so that people can understand what it is that they're getting into. And then we have a form for people to let us know that they're going to run the workshop. And then we let you know what the steps are afterwards. And currently those steps are, let us know that you have run it. And then we want to collect some information from you. And once we get that from you, we now have speaker resources and speaker mentorship. And so participants of the workshop will have access to some extra resources. And we're starting to also have some speaker mentors who will work with them on their pitches, help them rehearse, things like that. That is what this group is, and you'll learn a lot more about it in my talk. I'm going to pass it back to Dan right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much for giving that overview. As I mentioned at the start, this is such an important topic and subject matter. We're covering, obviously, WordCamps, meetups, events throughout the WordPress space. So Jill, I really appreciate you obviously giving time into this and really shining a light on it and focusing our energy and efforts onto it. It's something that we've certainly got in WordCamp London. We've had a lot of focus around the diversity of speakers, and it's by just simply being aware of it and simply giving some focus to it, we've seen an incredible increase in the diverse number of speakers and individuals that we have. So it's incredibly important. I see. Have you got your slides up there?
They should be showing.
Excellent. Let me pull them up for you. Okay, we've got your. Can you see those? Okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm now going to hand you back to Jill. Jill is going to be giving her talk, Empowering Speakers, the Diverse Speaker Training Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So as Dan just said, my talk is called Empowering Speakers, the WordPress Diverse Speaker Training Group, and our hashtag is #WP Diversity. So just a couple of words about me. My name is Jill Binder. I'm the leader of the WordPress Diverse Speaker Training Group in the WordPress community team, and my work there is 50% sponsored by Automatic. And I'm also taking the diverse speaker training to more tech conferences and companies with my new business, diversein.tech. And also you can find me at Jill Binder on Twitter and on the WordPress Slack. So I'm talking to you today about diverse public speakers in WordPress. And I'm so delighted that this is a topic that has come up a number of times throughout the talks today, because it is so important and people have raised some really amazing, powerful points about it. Some of them I'll be repeating, and some I'll also be giving some other points as well. So a question for you. What would WordPress look like if it had more diverse leaders and organizers? Just like how talking books were created in 1918 for the visually impaired, and still today audiobooks are popular in the mainstream, more people's needs would be included, and there would be fresh ideas that would benefit everyone. What's the fastest way to create more diverse leaders and organizers? Public speaking. Once people are using their voices, some go on to do more. Easy, right? Just get people to do public speaking, no problem. Well, in 2013, when it was my first time co-organizing WordCamp Vancouver, the three of us were having dinner, and there were 40 speaker applications spread out before us. We actually had 52 applications come in, and 40 of them were applicable. The plan was to pick 14. We were doing 2 tracks. It was really hard. They were all really good. 7 of them were applications from women. And I was going to take a step back for just a second. This story starts off being about folks who identify as women, and it's going to sound like that's what my focus is, but I'm just talking about it that way because that's how the story starts, and later it'll become about all diversity. So my colleagues said, all the talks are really good. Let's accept all the women speakers that we can. And at this point, I was the one who didn't know that it was a problem. I didn't know that not many women were applying to speak at tech conferences. So I was the one saying, who cares what gender they are? Let's pick based on the talks. And they said, they were such kind men who were great allies and who explained to me, no, these are all really good talks. And frankly, we need to accept all of them or we'll get called out. It's an awful thing. It's an awful thing to be thinking about at the time, but I learned later how actually important and valuable that was. So we had 7 women apply. 6 of them were a fit. And then 2 things happened. One is we really, really liked all our applicants, and we wanted to build a 3rd track because of that. So 14 became 28, and then we had 6 out of 28 women speakers. And the next thing that happened is 2 of the women dropped out because they had family obligations. So suddenly 4 out of 28 was not looking so good. And by the way, side note, guess how many men dropped out for family obligations? That's right, 0. So we had 4 out of 28 women speakers, 14%. This cat does not like that. This cat is sad. Also, several folks in the audience were not happy about it. They let us know. They talked to us privately. They even wrote blog posts about it publicly. So then that year, I went to WordCamp San Francisco, which was at the time the biggest WordPress conference that there was. It's what predated WordCamp US. And I went to a WordCamp organizers brunch, and I chatted with many of the other cities and countries there. And I found out this was actually a common problem for everyone. In fact, we actually had a really high number of women applicants in comparison to others, and a lot of them had none at all. And they wanted to know how we actually got so many. They all said the same thing. They all said they wanted to accept more, but they just weren't applying. So then I started researching. I started talking to other conference organizers. I started doing a lot of reading. And I learned some things. But first, before I get into what it was that I found, I want to take a step back and ask why. Who cares? Why should there be a diversity of voices? Why does it matter? Besides the fact that there's probably a lot more women and underrepresented folk who would like to apply than those who are already applying, and we should actually try to be removing some of these obstacles. Also, it actually benefits the community. A few of the reasons why it matters. And just so you know, the material I'm going to go through now, I'm reading it straight from our workshop that we created. So it sounds different than how I speak. And also our work is now about all diversity. So it's written that way as well. Number 1, a disproportionately large number of speakers at WordPress meetups and WordCamps and tech events in general look alike and come from the same background. That means that the speakers do not represent everyone sitting in the audience. Folks from underrepresented groups may, therefore, feel like they don't belong there. But there are many with a wide range of knowledge to share, and everyone can feel included. And I've even heard stories of some people not even going to a conference if they don't see somebody like them represented on stage on the speaker page. Number 2, WordPress is amazing in that it's open source, so all sorts of people use it. We want a more fair representation of the users in the people who are speaking. One of the ways in which WordPress is being shaped is by the people who speak about it publicly. I believe somebody mentioned this earlier today. Many folks from underrepresented groups, by nature of having had different life experiences, would approach problems differently. Just how a developer's point of view is different from a user's point of view, so are our viewpoints. Folks from underrepresented groups have experiences that aren't necessarily being shared right now. Number 4, by bringing in more diversity to the people at the podium, there's a better chance of bringing in folks who are straddling several roles and thus creating unique things with unique perspectives. Power users who are using it in interesting ways, front-end developers, business people who use plugins to make specific kinds of sites, typographers who use WordPress to do wild things with typography, people that talk about running a business in WordPress, how developers can communicate with designers, different things you can do with WordPress, etc. And number 5, when people see themselves represented on stage, it gives more people confidence and helps them feel like they belong there and they feel less underrepresented. So what was stopping these women from applying? Just like Mariaki said earlier, there's a lot of reasons in society why this happens. And much like she and I would both love to change all of society if we could, we've each opted to focus on one thing that we could actually do something about. And in my case, it was when we would ask women, hey, will you speak at our conference? We would get 2 answers. And I'd like to throw this question to you. What do you think that these 2 answers were? And I'd love to see your thoughts in the chat. All right, since everyone is giving their thoughts, just kidding, I will give you the answers. The 2 things that they would say back to me are, what would I talk about? And I'm not an expert. And I just kept hearing these answers over and over, and I started to feel defeated. Then something happened. I was at a feminist blanket fort party. And as one does at a feminist blanket fort party, we talked about feminist issues. I talked about this situation, and one of the ladies said, why don't you get them in a room and have them brainstorm ideas? So the next thing I knew, I was leading a team of women in Vancouver who were creating a workshop that included this brainstorming. We have the participants brainstorm ideas. We show them that they have literally 100 ideas. That's how many of the people generate in this exercise. And then their biggest problem becomes picking one. Another example of something that we talk about in the workshop is we tackle this I'm not an expert question head on, and we bust through this imposter syndrome. We debunk who is the person in the front of the room. So this thing, I'm not an expert, we explain how the person at the front of the room is not necessarily an expert. It's the person who would like to share some knowledge. In WordPress, we encourage community sharing. Also, there's this phenomenon where when a member of an overrepresented group knows a little bit about a topic, they feel like they know enough to give a talk about it, and they've seen many faces like theirs up on stage before. But when someone from an underrepresented group knows a little bit about a topic, they frequently feel like they don't know enough to give a talk about it. They don't see people like them represented on stage and represented as experts. And also, many diverse folks set a much higher bar for expert knowledge than other people do. And lastly, everyone is an expert in their own experiences. WordCamp Central got wind of what we were creating, and then they helped shape the workshop as well. And particularly, they put in the point that there are different types of talk formats. A lot of talks are big how-to brain dump sessions, how to make a plugin, might be someone walking through how to make it, maybe even live coding, and at the end there are questions. And WordCamp Central found that this isn't necessarily a good way to impart information. People were often walking away feeling overwhelmed and not remembering anything that they learned. There are other talk formats that promote story-based learning. Talking about how you learn something, for example, means that other people can also learn how to learn. And I was so delighted today to see that most of the talks today were stories. And we're all talking in the chat about needing to bring out the tissues. You can see how powerful stories can be. So some of the various formats that we talk about: how to, the standard way that tech talks happen; Discussion. You're the facilitator on a topic and the audience discusses it together. Panel. Multiple people answer questions on the same topic. Story-based. This could be how you learned something, mistakes you made, or any other narrative format. Case study. The story of how you created one thing in particular. Workshop. A hands-on learning experience where people bring their laptops and create a thing as you go. So in the end, our workshop covers this and more, and it's up to 4 hours, hands-on and effective. So how did we do? The next year, WordCamp Vancouver, we're ambitious. We made it a developer edition. That year, we had 60 applications come in total, and this time we had spots for 18. We were not going to make that mistake again of doing a third track. That was ridiculous, not recommended, at least not for a WordCamp of our size. And this year, 20 women applied. That was 3 times more than the applicants of the year before. And it was a developer edition as well. And as we know, there tend to be fewer women developers than there are men. So look, that's 50%. For a brief time, it was, for a brief time, we had exactly 50% selected. And then in this year, we had 1 woman and 1 man drop out last minute. And the backup speaker that we had lined up for one of them was a man. So then in our final numbers, it was 8 out of 17, which is almost 50%, which is still pretty good. Still pretty great. So more charts and another cat. Hooray, this cat likes this. So then we moved to all diversity. First, there were other cities who saw what we were doing and they were inspired to run their own versions of our workshop. They didn't have the script. They just saw our meetup page describing what we were doing and they're like, oh, we can create that too. So they went ahead and created their own versions, which were amazing. And then the next year, WordCamp Central asked if we could take the best content from each of these and put together a script that could be run anywhere in the world and could be run for all diversity. And so we did this. So we grabbed the best content from Seattle, Montreal, Portland, and Vancouver to create what is now our workshop. And our agenda of our workshop is imposter syndrome, finding a topic, writing a pitch, creating your talk, becoming a better speaker, creating great slides. And then we also have people level up practicing speaking throughout. If they wish, they can opt out of it. We know that a lot of people who come to it are nervous, and we try to make it as friendly and accessible as possible. The Diverse Speaker Training Working Group. The story of how that was born out of this work is starting in late 2017, Andrew Middleton, who's a longtime WordPress community organizer, came to me and said, you know, Jill, many cities have been running this training and we know that it works, but nobody knows about it. So she and I created the concept of the first working group in the WordPress community team, which is now called the Diverse Speaker Training Group. It's a mouthful. It is less of a mouthful than the title we first had. We have changed it. It is slightly better. Our mandate is to promote and train this workshop all over the world. And I've been leading this group since that conversation in late 2017. So far, it has been run in 21 meetups in 9 countries: Brazil, Canada, India, Italy, South Africa, Spain, UK, USA, and Venezuela. And those who ran this workshop typically went from about 10% diverse speakers at their WordCamps to, in just a few months, 10% into in just a few months, 50% or more. Can you imagine? This is incredible. And the world is hungry for this work. In 2018 alone, we got interest and had conversations with 55 cities in 26 countries. And I actually just learned right before this that London didn't run a workshop themselves, but because they were having conversations with us, they actually went ahead and achieved 50% at their WordCamp as well. So it's not even just the ones who run the training. It's also just learning how important it is and putting that focus on it. If your meetup or WordCamp would like to learn more so that they can diversify their speaker lineup, and or if you know of meetups and WordCamps who you think could benefit from this, please let them know. Our workshop is free within WordPress, and they can learn more about it and sign up at tiny.cc/WP diversity. Also, our team just produced 2 new resources for the WordPress community, which were a year in the making and we've just published a week ago. It's kind of a long URL, but it is shorter than the actual URL. This is like the tag for all the work that we do. And I figured that is probably easier to find my post about it than the actual long tag. But you can find the long tag on my social media. But kind of within this week, the easiest way to find it before we have too many other posts at this tag, make.wordpress.org/community/tag/WP diversity. And the 2 documents that we now have up are called Building a Diverse Speaker Roster and Inclusive and Welcoming Events. And so I thought that concludes my actual story part. And I thought I'd spend the rest of the time sharing a bit more information from the Building a Diverse Speaker Roster document, because it is more things that I've learned since my journey first started in 2013. It's things that we recommend for creating a diverse speaker lineup, the workshop, plus other best practices. And so this content comes both from this document as well as from the workshop that Ali Nimmons, Aruba Ahmed, and David Wolfpaw and I created for WordCamp US this year. And also that workshop is going to be available as a self-guided training on the Make WordPress community site sometime in the future. So I thought I'd share with you, starting with, how do you invite people so that they feel welcome, valuable, and feel like they have something to speak about? People respond best to direct invitations to apply. When you ask if they'd like to speak, you can leave it open-ended or ask if they can apply to speak on a particular thing that you know that they're great at. And if they give an answer like most of our folks did, if they say no because they think they have nothing to speak about, and for some reason you don't have our workshop coming up in the near future to invite them to, you can have a conversation with them on the spot. And here's some ways that you might consider navigating that conversation. Let's say I was talking to Sarah. I would start with sharing with Sarah, at WordPress events, the talks are starting to move to story format. We say, don't teach a lesson, tell a story. Many people forget the details of how-to talks, but with stories, they learn how to learn. And also everyone's an expert in their own story. And if she says she doesn't have a story, I would ask her what WordPress topics she's passionate about. And if she doesn't have an answer for that, I'd ask what WordPress related thing that she's learned recently or mistakes that she's made that would make for a great story. Let's say she says she's new to WordPress, so she hasn't learned anything yet. I'd suggest that she takes notes as she starts to learn something so she can tell a story about it later. And if she's been in WordPress for a while, I can move the conversation forward by suggesting things that I know she could talk about. Maybe she's just created a new theme, or she has a story about her journey, learning how to do something. And of course, it is also great to invite her to your diverse speaker training workshop. It will help her see many things that she could talk about and also cover many of the other obstacles that she may have to public speaking. And also, people ask me how to do their speaker application page. One of the things you can do is post a list of suggested topics on that page. It won't replace a personal conversation or a workshop, but it may wind up reaching more people, giving more people access to inspiration. In addition to inviting them to speak and holding the workshop, there's some good practices that your group can apply. Consider speaker diversity during the speaker selection process. It's best if you can keep an eye on how many overrepresented versus diverse speakers you have in your lineup. Try to aim for 50% or more speakers from an underrepresented group if you can. Some selection committees will still prefer to use blind review, And that's okay. If yours does, at a minimum, you should at least set clear guidelines for what you're looking for in applications before you start going through them. Include diverse voices and organizers in the selection committee. This will help ensure everyone gets a fair shake and folks don't feel tokenized when invited to apply. Have more than one person in your speaker outreach team. More people looking means having more diverse networks and thus a more diverse roster. And also, it's always important, have more diversity in your group's leadership. Now let's talk about making sure speakers feel equal and welcome, because it's terrible if they speak and they have a bad experience. The first time that they speak is the most important, but also every single time counts. I know a story of a prestigious speaker who gives topics on the topic of diversity. She was very upset at her treatment at a non-WordPress conference. She sent letters of complaint to their organizers. She'd agreed to speak for free because she was a featured speaker at a huge and important conference, so she was expecting a large turnout and expecting to be able to make a big difference. No one acknowledged that she was there. She didn't get the swag that other speakers received, and her session wasn't well promoted, so no one came to it. And she's now turned off from speaking at non-paid events. How can you make sure that your speakers feel equal and welcome? First of all, we're not paid at WordPress events, but if you are running an event where they are paid, make sure everyone is paid the same. Have someone greet the speaker when they check in so that they feel welcome. If there's speaker swag, create a process to ensure that everyone receives it. If the speaker is not already well known in the community or doing a popular topic, give them extra promotion at the event. And likewise, if a person's talk, give the person's talk social media boosts before, during, and after. Tell your team that if they saw the talk and liked it, to tell the person so. Thank the speaker for coming out and let them know that you hope that they'll speak again. And here's an interesting one. Don't send unmoderated speaker feedback unless the person requests it. Edit out negative feedback that isn't constructive to their growth as a speaker. I have seen cases where people just swore off speaking entirely because they were sent all the feedback. And, people can be cruel, not even thinking that the person's going to see it or whatever they're thinking at the time. People who are turned off from speaking from things that aren't actually constructive to help them with their growth. This can be easily avoided. And also, here's one that I just learned about recently. Openly share your community's goals for making more diverse and inclusive events and celebrate your progress publicly. For example, WordCamp Miami posted these in their camp's closing remarks and on Twitter. They posted their number of speakers over the years, their ratio of male to female speakers that year, and the ratio of new speakers. So we're actually circling back to my original story now, and all the way back to the beginning when I was talking about creating diverse organizers and leaders. Our workshop and the best practices that I just talked about create tangible local community changes that you can see and that make a difference. Take Kirsten in Vancouver. She took our workshop, spoke for the first time at our conference, got spotted by a local agency, became their first female developer, and quickly became their senior developer and team lead. And then she brought in more ladies into the team. Someone mentioned before about people getting careers out of public speaking. This is an example of that. We also, senior developer, there you go. It also creates actually created new leadership at our Vancouver WordCamp. One year, Vancouver had 5 out of 6 female organizers of our WordCamp, and several of which were graduates of our workshop. And also, 2 of our graduates created a new meetup track in Vancouver for a while, which was a user track, which is something that we had never had before. I love this work. I love the changes that it makes. I love the changes in people's lives, in the communities, and the changes in technology when more voices are brought up and people are exposed to more ideas. And it is now my life purpose to take this workshop and this important information to the whole world. And WordPress is just the first step. This isn't just about getting more speakers of different types. It's what happens when you give different voices a voice. So I wanted to share, once again, the link that I'm promoting today, tiny.cc/WP diversity, and I will pass it back to Dan to facilitate questions and discussion.
Jill, thank you so much. Incredible story again. It's been a day full of them, which is it's amazing. As I said at the start, such an important topic. This around diversity. We need to ensure that we are talking about this and that we are as a community aware of how we're going through these speaker selection processes, how we're enabling people to take part in our community events and making sure that they are actually that community events. Our community are made up of so many different people in so many different ways. So it really is. I'm so grateful for you raising this and obviously being at the kind of the front end of bringing this to the community. So thank you very much. I have a question that I think you touched on obviously already through this, and your talk really did cover. It really was a very full talk. The question that I have, and it's something that I've struggled with quite a bit, particularly with WordCamp London, is that blind selection process, the blind speaker selection process. And we've had a lot of talks internally because we've always adopted that model, and in recent years we've then reviewed after we've gone through the blind process from a diversity perspective, but it's never quite sat right with me, because it feels like we're excluding individuals, but then we're focusing on the content as opposed to anything else when we go through that process. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on whether you advise going through that blind selection process or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're saying that your community does blind selection and you're wondering about that versus actually looking, purely content versus a mix between content, a mix between diversity. And also we think of diversity as, local, long distance, men, women, and thankfully also other kinds of diversity are coming up now as well.
Absolutely.
I have a couple of different answers for that. One is blind selection often rules out new speakers who haven't written many pitches before and haven't given many talks before. And if your community has predominantly been one kind of speaker previously, and so diverse voices are quite likely new voices, they may not be considered if they don't have a great pitch. If they take our workshop, they'll have a good pitch. But if they haven't done that, then they might just not be counted in at all. And also, the speakers who have been doing it a lot, even if you don't see their name, often you can tell who wrote it, or they just sparkle more because they've been doing it for so long. And so blind selection is not great for new speakers, and which often new speakers means diversity. And the other thing about it is the reason that I recommend, if you can, choosing diversity over content is because just by nature of having different perspectives and different backgrounds, they are going to bring in completely different, it's going to make the whole event more dynamic because there's different stories, different vibe. Often they'll be bringing ideas that people haven't thought of before, even if it's a topic that's been covered many times, just by nature of having a different background and not looking like everybody else, they're going to bring something new to it. So I do when people are not sure which way to go, I like to say go on the side of choosing for diversity.
Mhm.
It there is my personal opinion is um, the case for blind selection is if you've gotten to that point where you have so many applications that many of them are diverse. Like usually you get just a few, and so it's better to select with them in mind. But if you get to that point where you truly have a mix of talks, I still prefer the choosing for diversity method, but that is one of the cases where blind selection uh, could be effective.
Mhm.
Um, what some people do also is first do blind selection and then go over it again, looking for, okay, now that we've chosen, how is our diversity? And if there were two talks that were the same, but one by a white man and the other by a queer black woman, then switch it out for the other one. There's all kinds of arguments for it, but I just think that there's so much value for so many reasons to have diversity that I recommend
Mhm.
skewing for that.
Mhm. Excellent. Yeah, we it was really interesting actually this year with particularly with WordCamp London. I think we had and Babs may correct me here, but I think we were somewhere in the region of about 128, I think it was, speaker applications come in for the event. And we were so we do a blind selection process and then we review for diversity and company over representation and the various aspects in relation to diversity. Uh, but purely off, and so we anonymize the content and we then make that spreadsheet available, or just make that spreadsheet available to all the organizing team. So we actually invite the whole
Mm.
team to get involved at this point. So this year we had with 14 people that reviewed that spreadsheet. They score between 1 and 5, high low, whether they would want to listen or watch that session. We then take the top, whatever the number was for the number of sessions that we had, and say, well, what does that mix now look like? And obviously, we've got everybody else below that, or all the rest of the sessions outside of that we can then uh, pick if we need to, based on the scoring
Mm.
system. Off the back of the blind vote that had gone out to the 14 organisers, we had an exact 50-50 representation between individuals that identified themselves as male and female. It was just incredible that we had this.
Wow. So it actually just worked out when you did
Yes,
it that
yeah.
way. That's
Unfortunately,
incredible.
we did have a situation where some of the speakers couldn't. They were unavailable, so we then had to change. So we didn't quite get 50-50 at the end at
Mm,
the event itself. But
right.
I was really quite taken aback that we, off the blind selection process, we had that 50-50 in terms of the individuals.
That is amazing. I love it.
Yes,
It
yeah,
was quite wonderful. I'm sure it does have something to do with this diversity training that's been going on, because
Um,
it was sort of further on from that becoming known about and everything. And of course, didn't Diane do something at WordPress London?
mhm, yes,
Yes, because
yeah,
she's one of the trainers, I think, isn't she?
she was for a while. Yeah, she was quite
mhm,
Yeah,
involved, and I'm so happy to hear that she had an influence on the
mhm,
community
yeah.
in some way, either with the workshop or just by
mhm.
bringing the issue to light. It sounds fantastic.
Mm. Yeah, she's a co-organizer for the WordPress London meetup, which we also run, and she brought did a talk around this at the event, and obviously something we're very aware of as an organising team. So it's fantastic that, as I said, it's just
Beautiful.
great that we're having these conversations within our community, and looking for ways to answer sometimes what can be quite difficult questions. It's
Hmm.
how do we ensure? I mean, for example, going through that speaker selection process for WordCamps, we put a form out. We ask people to submit their information. Now, we then, well, we are trying to make a decision on that individual whether they represent themselves as male or female based predominantly on their name,
Mm.
which can be very challenging. Obviously, the, there are so many kind of obstacles through the speaker application process that we can come up against in relation to diversity.
Yeah, that's something that Andrea and I have been talking about how there's ways to automate seeing if there's, who's women and men, slight error, but it's really, really close to the actual numbers. And we're looking at, is there a way to automate for all diversity? And we have not found it yet, because how do you do that?
Yes.
And that's something that we're talking about, for our statistics for this coming year. Are we going to look at gender, all diversity? Well, gender can be automated based on names. So it's not 100%, but it's so close to it.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, location can be one as well. If we're running a WordCamp, we try and focus on the local community and local individuals that are part of the active community. But for something like WordCamp London, it does attract an international audience, and that can then be quite challenging, because actually, are we neglecting our local community without really realizing it, because we're selecting through the blind selection process individuals that are, we may find that we've got
Right.
good repeat individuals that speak a lot at WordCamp, so they understand how to write their synopsis and their bio and so on. So, like you said,
Right.
because they're doing it regularly, they've had a lot of practice, they shine through when you read a blind selection process.
Right. Are you actually aware of the WordCamp Central recommendation on percentage of local versus non-local speakers at WordCamps? Because they actually have a fraction that
Okay.
they recommend 80% local
Mhm.
and 20% from other places. And so one of the reasons that they love this work is because it is developing local speakers.
Mm, mm.
Because otherwise you get the same speakers traveling around everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's really important to, when people start stepping up to speak, as I talked about my talk, so many amazing things can happen. So it's really important to foster that localness. But I can also understand when you're doing speaker selection, there's a lot going on. And so it's hard to be perfect in every metric that you're
Yes,
going for.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that goes across the WordCamp organizing board, doesn't it? There's a lot going on. But
Oh
yes.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
These things
The
are a lot of work.
something that's really kind of interesting is around the more local meetups and the smaller events, where potentially it can be slightly more difficult to find speakers, because we're talking about a much more local audience. I mean, I run multiple meetups, not just London, but other meetups elsewhere that have less of an attraction or less of an audience than London, for example.
Hmm.
So often we can find that there's less of a pool of speakers to reach out for these smaller events, which can sometimes
Absolutely.
come as a challenge when we're talking about diversity for speaker selection.
Sometimes it's a challenge just to get any speakers, let alone
Yes.
diverse speakers. And I'll let you know on a little secret. There are groups who run our workshop just for everyone, because, to get more speakers at all. But then a magical thing happens of the way the description is written. It
Mhm.
speaks to the imposter syndrome that underrepresented folks from underrepresented groups have. And so
Mhm.
more of them tend to come out. So I don't mind when they do for general, because we still get the diversity happening, but it can also raise other people's voices if you need more speakers
Yes.
at all.
Absolutely. I think the as a community, I'd say we're doing a lot better. Obviously, some of the statistics that you
Mm,
shared there, we're doing a lot better than we were, and I definitely think we certainly feel like we're heading in the right sort of direction. I wonder what this would look like as we go outside of the WordPress space, as we go into other tech
mm,
events and other areas. I think things like code of conduct and having
mm,
policies in place that support these kinds of initiatives are important. And I know I've
right.
certainly been invited to speak at conferences, and I've looked at the website, I've looked at the photos of the event, and I've seen nothing but white males with beards that look just like me, and that's all the photos are. And I think, well, actually, no,
Mhm.
that's not something I particularly want to be involved in, because I want to be in a diverse community. I want to be around
Oh, Dan, I love
individuals.
hearing that. That's
Yes.
amazing. And I'm not talking too much about my business today. I just mentioned it in passing. But since you brought up this topic, um, because this work has been so effective, I have started bringing it to other technologies. And they face a different situation because WordPress tends to be more diverse in the audience, users, and even developers overall. And when I started, not the people in front of the room. So it was like, okay, well, that's the next step. Whereas these other communities are not having that diversity. And so they're bringing on the workshop as a way to actually raise their whole diversity, because it's a cycle. One feeds into the other. And they have, I've run it for groups like Magento and Drupal now, and they had folks come out to their workshops who they had never, like the people running it, like they know all the speakers. We had folks come out to the workshop who they'd never seen before. And they're like, we didn't even know these people were in the community, which happens a lot in WordPress as well. People who never come out to events, here's an event for them, they come out to it, and then they start participating, and the change happens. So I need to do some tweaks for the workshops and some customizing for it, but the basic premise of it works across different places. And I'm hoping to, right now I've been working with open source communities, and I'm looking forward to bring it to other communities as well and see how that goes. So if you know of groups who could use this work, please send them my way.
Absolutely.
I really, really want to be helping more out there. And it's been in the news lately that there have been conferences that have been all white men, people who are not happy about it. And then there's a lot more factors to it than just that. I'm oversimplifying, but there have been conferences that have been canceled for this reason.
Yes.
I'm really glad it's become an issue that people are actually standing up for now.
It is. It's as I say, if with so many of the topics that we're talking about across this event today, it's creating the normalization of it. Let's continue to talk about it, and it becomes normal. It becomes expected that we're just going to talk. We're just going to ensure that we are being diverse in the way that we're selecting our speakers, and we're having our events and our organizing teams and everybody that's involved across the board.
Absolutely.
Okay, Jill, again, that's our hour up. I just really want to say a huge thank you for you giving your time and coming to talk about this important topic and share what you're doing within the community. It's incredible how you're giving your time and you're giving your skill and your passion to bring this to the wider community. So thank you very much.
Thank you
And
so
you're
much,
making a
Dan.
difference. You really are. So thank you.
You absolutely
Thanks
are,
so much.
yes.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for for joining us. We shall speak soon. I'm just going to quickly wrap up the session. As always, at the end of these sessions, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. We are going to be changing over to our 9th and final session. How are we on our final session already for this event? If you are joining us on wp&up.org/live, you're going to need to refresh your browser in about 2 or 3 minutes time to catch up with us over there. If you are over there, please do use the chat. I see we've had a few drop off, but we've had an incredible amount of conversation go on over the day in that chat. I'm going to ask at the end of the next session, have a guess of how many conversations or how many chats have happened throughout the day, because you lot have been very chatty. I'm again really excited about the next session. We're going to be talking about the GoDaddy for Good platform, as well as having Adam Warner give his talk about how he's gone from passion to profession. So really looking forward to this. And as always, I'll mention again in a moment, we've got the orange button down the bottom there. If you want to support all of the nonprofits that are being represented across this event today, then that's your opportunity to do so. There's an option there to support via credit card or via PayPal. All donations, as I said, are distributed across all the nonprofits. Other than that, Babs, was there anything that you wanted to share before we wrap up?
Nope, not at this stage. I think 1 more hour and then we can go to bed.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, we shall see you on the other side in about 2 minutes' time. Thank you.